Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today's conversation and engagement is adding into our orientation program, which is a program that we first launched last year, and it is a program that is easily available on RU Connect. So all the way to my colleague who's here as well, we'll post the link for you to subscribe to our non-accredited orientation program. Just before moving on, I think our presentation today, my name is Asiphe. So I'm doing the presentation with McKenna, who's the director at the Center for Postgraduate Studies. Our presentation looks at managing your research as well as managing your supervisor. As we are continuing to present today, please ensure that you check on your chats. There will be messages about the evaluation, which is very important to evaluate this workshop and any other workshops that you have done at CBGS, and also to offer your suggestions and say what you are learning or what you have learned. So we look forward to engaging with those evaluations, as we received wonderful suggestions from the Monday's conversation when we launched this program. So today's presentation looks at managing your research and managing your supervisor, and it is more of an interacting conversation between ourselves and everyone that is present here today. To start us off, I think one key question that we can look at is the characteristics of a good supervisor. So I'd like you to take a moment. Think about the 5 characteristics of a good supervisor. What do you think these characteristics are for a good supervisor? Please write in the chat so that you can engage this together. Okay, thank you very much, Tulisile. So Tulisile here is saying one that gives prompt feedback. It's very important, that word feedback, and I think Sioux will be touching a lot on that. But a lot of postgraduate students tend to think that feedback is actually correction, but feedback is an active engagement from the supervisor engaging your work. A supervisor can give advice. A supervisor that is open to communication and correction. Okay. Correction in a manner of working out your relationship with the supervisor, or correction in scholarship. A supervisor that is supportive. A good listener, timely feedback, and provides direction. That is concerned with the study and follows up by making our time, guides, transparent, and provide constructive feedback. Okay, professionalism, understanding, subject mastery. Okay. So all these ideas that you are saying in the chats are very important, because that means it is something that you might have, or also it is something that you have experienced from your supervisors. Correction to verified error, patient and appreciate that the researcher is still learning. Very important. But Sioux will take us through, together with the conversation that we have on chats, on what are actually the characteristics of a good supervisor. Over to you, Sioux.
Thank you so much, Asiphe. Let me turn on my camera just for a second. Yeah, so if we think of all these things that we want our supervisors to be, and I love the list that's coming up, please keep them going. These are certainly all things that we would like our supervisors to be. But possibly your supervisor isn't all of these things. So when I have a look at the literature, because I am very interested in the literature on postgraduate supervision, when I look at the literature, it seems over and over again 5 things come up, and you've mentioned many of them already. The first one, very important one, is an active scholar. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have a supervisor who's a Nobel Prize winner, who's got all sorts of awards for their research. In fact, I mean, wonderful if you can have that supervisor, but bear in mind that the flip side of that is they probably aren't available all the time. So if you're going to have a really cutting edge supervisor who's like at the top of their field, you probably need to bear in mind that you are going to need even more perhaps than others to have some kind of community that can support you, perhaps some co-supervision. But this person doesn't need to be this cutting edge researcher. They need to be an active researcher. So if your supervisor's only just got their own PhD, it's true, you'll be learning with them. They don't really know what to do yet, but they are engaged in the field. They're interested in the field. And so really you want someone, it doesn't matter if they're starting out or they're at retirement or post-retirement. It's very important that they have active scholarship. There are examples in South Africa, and again, our latest review of the doctorate showed this. There are examples of academics who've been in the system for a very long time. They got their doctorate 20, 30 years ago. They are not active scholars. They're not going to conferences. They're not keeping up to date with the readings. They're not doing their own experiments or their own research. And that's a problem. So if you've got a supervisor who's not actively involved in the field, it's a problem because they won't know what the current debates are. And you want someone, as someone said, you want someone who can guide you in what you need to do, what are the current ways of doing things. A few of you mentioned the second attribute, which is to be developmental. Sort of, I think someone said someone who understands that you're still learning. I think that's absolutely right. The very first comment was about feedback. So you want regular, constructive feedback. Regular, it should come as fairly soon after you've submitted work, or it should be possible for you to get an appointment to talk about your work, and it should be constructive. By the way, that doesn't always mean nice. It can be quite harsh feedback, but it's given in a way that there's a real sense that your supervisor wants you to succeed and wants your research to make its contribution. So even when the feedback is perhaps challenging intellectually or emotionally, it should still, even when you feel despondent when you get that feedback, there should still be a sense that the feedback is developed to try and push you forward and to push your study forward. So when you get over feeling a bit blue about the feedback, you can continue working. You don't feel alienated and devastated because the feedback is a personal attack. It should never be a personal attack, even when it's particularly harsh in terms of the content. It should be written in a way that makes you feel that you want to engage with it and you want to move forward. Ideally, a supervisor is networked and connected. They are able to introduce you to key people in the fields. They are able to open doors for you to go to conferences, to get funding, to find collaborative opportunities. Many people, especially in these very austerity times, many supervisors will not have this. They're either still building it themselves, or they can introduce you to one or two people, but they haven't got the funding to help you. But that is certainly in the literature as one of the ideal attributes of a supervisor. Kind, caring, and compassionate. Again, that doesn't have to mean nice. It doesn't have to mean that they always smile at you and follow all the social etiquette, but it just means that they wouldn't be rude in a way that makes you feel bad. They genuinely care about your well-being. Different supervisors are different. Some will be very personal. You'll call them by their first name. You'll get to know each other's families. You'll be in and out of each other's houses. Others, you will definitely be calling them by their title. They won't necessarily know about your family, and you won't know about theirs. Different personalities, different fields. But across the range of those personalities, you should have a sense, even if it is that very kind of detached, more traditional supervisor, you should still have a sense that they genuinely care about you and your project. And they should be accessible. So that's why I said, if you're working with that really high profile professor who's never around, are they willing to make time for you sometime? Are they able to squeeze you in, or do you feel like you very much off their agenda, in which case you probably need to find additional support. So here's what the literature tells us. But is your supervisor, or can you click the next slide? Is your supervisor all of these things? You know, it's unlikely that you're ever going to find a supervisor that has all of these 5 traits in their fullness. Or it's quite possible that your supervisor has them at times, but at some stage they're just too busy, too frustrated going through their own personal stuff, and they aren't able to have all of these traits all of the time. But as a supervisor, these are certainly traits that I aspire towards, that I try to work towards. And any of you that are in the room that are supervisors, I hope that you would also see these as things that you would like to work towards, even when on a bad day you aren't quite able to perhaps demonstrate them as much as you would like. And that takes me to the point that, just a reminder to the postgrads in the room, that supervisors are people. Not all of them are good people, and I hope that you have a good person supervisor, but all of them are human. So even the good supervisor is going to have off days and bad moments. And just like you hope that they will treat you with kindness and compassion on your bad days, bear in mind that they might need a bit of kindness and compassion along the way. Won't you move along to the next slide, please, Asiphe? That's yours.
Thank you very much, Sue. You've touched on a lot of things. And in essence, when one is looking for a supervisor, they often look for someone who understands their field. But sometimes you actually get a co-supervisor that is good at the methodology. So learning is not an easy process. When it is tough, we often need someone to blame, and those feelings can actually hinder the process of building a relationship with your supervisor, particularly when it comes to feedback, which you all know it's often intriguing. But now that we've listed the characteristics of a good supervisor, let us hear from you as well as the supervisors that are in the room. What are the characteristics of a good postgraduate scholar? Now you take it to yourself, reflection. What makes you a good postgraduate scholar? And if you have supervisors in the room, what do they think the 5 characteristics of a good postgraduate scholar are? Okay. Openness, inquisitive, responding to supervisors' comments on time. One who is not pushed by their supervisor, they manage their time. You know, I often have discussions when it comes to postgrad students speaking about their research, particularly those who will be working with supervisors for the very first time, that in actual fact, research is, you treat research as a car. And in that car, as a postgraduate student, you're staying on the task, meaning you're staying on the wheels. You are the one who is driving that car, and your supervisor is in the passenger seat. Regular communication and asking for help, yes. Someone who is motivated to learn and always doing her work diligently as expected. Okay, so M&D's approaches for transforming students: encourage their supervisee to join professional organization seminars. One who is eager to learn, open-minded. Okay, so these are incredible characteristics as discussed. And I need us to reflect as we are moving back to Sue on how many of these characteristics do you embody? As I said, it is a moment of self-reflection. How well do you score if you score yourself in that? And Sue will take us through to the scoring and assertiveness.
Thanks, Asiphe. Yeah, how do you score? So again, what we've got here are a few characteristics from the literature, and I'm going to ask you to score yourself. I'll explain each of these terms in a moment, but I'm going to ask you to score yourself on a score from 1 to 5. Don't worry, you don't have to do this in the chat. You can do this privately. This is not a moment of announcement to all. This is a moment for your own self-reflection. But here you have characteristics which the literature suggests make for very strong postgraduate students. And I'm going to ask you to score yourself on a score from 1 to 5. I wonder if you can go to the next slide, please, Asiphe, so that I can go through the meaning of each of these. Right. Wow. Sorry, that's a lot of text, but let's go through it. So, assertiveness. Assertiveness. How assertive are you? If you have a sort of feeling of, I'm really scared of my supervisor and I hide when I see her coming, that's a 1. If you are, I negotiate all my expectations with my supervisor and I inform her of my needs, that's a 5. So if you can, on a piece of paper or wherever you like, give yourself a score from 1 to 5 on assertiveness. The next one is self-management. How good are you at self-organization, self-management, time management, and so on? If you are the kind of person who could say, well, I'm a bit disorganized, I'm inclined to double book appointments, I lose things, then I think you give yourself a 1. But if you're the kind of person who can honestly say, I'm super organized, I put in place systems for project management, then you can give yourself a 5. But perhaps you're somewhere in between. So give yourself a ranking somewhere between 1 and 5. The third characteristic, assistance seeking. This seems like an odd one because you would think that people who seek assistance are weaker postgraduate students, but the literature suggests these are stronger postgraduate students. So if you are kind of like the person who would say, well, I don't like to ask for help because I feel embarrassed, or I don't ever need any help, then you would give yourself a 1. So there's 2 very different kinds of people, but they would both give themselves a 1. Whether you're too intimidated to ask for help or whether you always feel that you can sort it out yourself and so you don't ask for help. All the way through to, if you're a number 5, you would say something like, I look for opportunities to try out ideas and get input from others. I ask when I get stuck. You would give yourself a 5. The kind of student who actively puts up their hand when someone's asked to volunteer to present, the kind of person who takes up opportunities to practice ideas and to give input to others, that would be a 5. The next characteristic, hardworking. Are you a number 1? I'm a bit on the lazy side. I mean to work on my study, but then whatever happens. Or are you all the way through to a 5? I'm committed to my study and I plan my life around it. And this, obviously, this number 5 doesn't mean I give up my life to do my studies. It's very important that you have good sleep and you have a good social life. These things are important, but do you plan those around your studies? The next one is resilient. Resilient is around the idea that any postgraduate study has ups and downs. It's a long period of times. Things don't always go right. Are you a number 1? I get really down when there's a knockback of any kind, and that can stop me working for days. Or are you all the way up to a number 5? I expect things will be a bit bumpy at times, and I take it in my stride. Where are you on resilience? The next one, how do you use feedback? And a few of you already mentioned that in the chat bar. Are you a number 1? I know what I'm doing and I don't need feedback. Or a different kind of number 1, I get devastated by negative feedback and I cannot go on for days. Or are you all the way up at a number 5? Sometimes feedback can be hard to hear, but I always engage and consider how it can improve my work. Or are you somewhere in between? And then finally, the characteristic of a really strong postgraduate student, communication and collegiality. With number 1 is, I'm not really a people person. Through to number 5, I learn through discussion and sharing. When one of us does well, we all benefit, supporting each other as part of the process. And again, that may seem an unusual one because we think of postgraduate studies as an individual endeavor. And it is an individual endeavor in that you will write a thesis that will be examined. It'll be your name on the front page. But the research shows that people who are able to share their work, learn from each other, find readings for other people in your group, it seems that those postgraduate students generally seem to get through their studies a bit more easily or a bit quicker. So having scored yourself from 1 to 5 on each of those characteristics, I think it's useful to note which ones you scored yourself really lowly on, and to think about how you can build those characteristics so that your postgraduate studies becomes more than just getting through the process and doing what needs to be done, but it rather genuinely becomes becoming a transformative project of yourself, where you take this time in creating knowledge for others to think about who you are and what kind of person you would like to be. Thanks, Asiphe. Do you want to move on to the next slide?
Thank you very much, Sue. Just before moving on to the pre-writing, I think the most important thing that we, including myself as a postgrad scholar, need to understand with this scoring moving forward from today is that it is also a form of accountability. You know, the most important thing when one decides to do their research is to understand that that particular research project, research topic is for you to own. And once one starts owning their research, they begin to embody many of these characteristics. And as Sue has indicated, it is very important for us to ask for help, and it is the important integral part in learning, because if you're not asking questions, if you're not asking for help, how are you going to learn? And yes, maybe it cannot be that we can master all 5 characteristics, but through building our confidence in research, there's going to be more and more confidence in terms of being able to master the submission time, communication, presentation, and that is very important for us to work on. So I hope that you will keep those scoring cards as your way of accountability. Now, moving forward, we are looking at task 4, which is free writing. Now, in this task, we need you to write. Free writing is about writing and moving the pen along. And it's actually good to do free writing when you feel stuck in your research as well, which is something that you can take from today. So we need you to write and respond to the question of what aspects of your behavior work against, of my behavior, if your behavior works against you in the supervision relationship. What aspects of your behavior works against you in the supervision relationship? Just 3 minutes to do some free writing. I see that there are people who have responded to the chats. Okay. Failing to ask questions. Being a perfectionist is really working against me. I do a lot of research and reading and fear to submit. Failure to meet deadline, the big one. Focusing on small issues which may not impact my research significantly. Not making submission as and when required. Not sticking to schedule. I mean, as a postgrad scholar myself, I relate in a lot of these things. And I think the most important part is understanding the timeline that one is working at, especially when it comes to the submission deadlines, not meeting submission deadlines. As much as it is important to ask questions and be guided by supervisor, for introverts, it is somehow difficult to always ask questions. Okay. So as you're looking at task 4, which was your free writing in terms of your behavior, I now want us to think for 3 minutes what aspects of your supervisor's approach require the most management by you. Another 3 minutes. I see there are conversations already in our chat. Learning, reading recommended tests, being proactive and interactive on my learning journey. I think these ones were based on the conversation that you've heard. I am still looking at the responses. Okay, his schedule should accommodate our academic engagement. That's a big one.
I think your point is really important, Asiphe, about how it has to become your own project. And that can be quite hard. It can be quite hard in the beginning, I think, because especially at undergraduate level, you're so used to whatever your work is, whatever your assignments are working on or whatever, it's almost always the lecturer's project. They tell you what to read, what to do, what to write. So it's quite a jump, because it's not like you're completely free, that you're a fully fledged researcher. You can just invent your own research project, but you also do need to have a real sense of ownership. That it's you who sets the meetings, that it's you who does the reading. Someone spoke about reading. It's about having that discipline of reading and reading and reading and reading, even while half the time you read a paragraph and you think, I didn't understand a single word of that. And you have the resilience to keep going and do more until somehow the code gets cracked and you suddenly realize, hey, I'm starting to understand this stuff. I think it's that kind of real sense of, this is my baby, this is my time, this is, I think that's really important. As you say, and then this issue of this idea that you manage your supervisor. I think some supervisors would hate that we say it like that, but I do think it is about managing the relationship, because if it's your project and you've got this guide, you're the driver in the car, but you've got a guide sitting next to you. You've got to manage how you interact with them. How often do you ask for directions? How do you speak to them? What are they in charge of, and what are you in charge of? I think it's quite a good analogy of this, almost like a driving instructor sitting next to you as you're learning to drive. But you can still crash the car, but hopefully your driving instructor will help you to prevent that happening. But in the end, you're the one who does the driving license, and goes off and drives from then onwards on your own. So I think that's really useful to think about, well, who is my supervisor? Have I got a grumpy driving instructor? Have I got a very generous driving instructor? Have I got a driving instructor who falls asleep 5 minutes into my lesson? Then we might have a problem. So to think through who they are as a person, and to think what you are as a person and what you need and how you're going to work together. Any other comments, Asiphe, before I go on to talk about the learning agreement?
Yes, and I think the most important thing is that a lot of the things that are said on the chats, particularly, they are about the relationship and the agreement that we are going to be speaking about, the issue of communication, the delivering of views and comments, and understanding that it is very important. You meet supervisors that give you one-word comments, and supervisors that just tell you, rewrite the whole thing. It is very important to continue being the driver of your research and actually asking for a meeting for clarity, or reporting back and comment on top of their comment to actually understand what they meant with regards to that. So the title of the workshop.
Yeah, so thanks for that. So what I'm going to talk to you about now in the next few minutes is to let you know that the Rhodes University supervision policy, which has been in existence since 2017, calls for all supervisors and postgraduate scholars to have a learning agreement. I think it hasn't been very well implemented, but that policy is actually going to Senate again next week, and that requirement is still there. So hopefully it'll really flag to all postgraduate students and supervisors that indeed we actually have a policy that says that we should negotiate how we're going to work together, and that we should make explicit what the expectations are, what your expectations are of your supervisor, what your supervisor's expectations are of you. I don't think this learning agreement should be seen as some kind of compliance legal agreement, not at all, but rather as a document that you can use to think through how you're going to work together. And we offer you a set of questions to actually have an appointment with your supervisor and say, can I discuss these questions? And you can actually, after this workshop, email your supervisors and say, hey, I've just been to this session, and Sue McKenna tells me that we're meant to have a learning agreement. Can I have an appointment with you to discuss it? So you're very welcome to blame me and to say that I said that you need to have this. And in fact, what we'll do, maybe don't do it straight after this, we'll send you the PowerPoint, we'll send you this document, which is in the policy, but it'll give you some questions to discuss with your supervisor. So the idea is that this is your first master's or your first PhD, but your supervisor, it may be their first time supervising, they may be supervising their 30th, their 60th. Often what happens is a whole lot of expectations. The supervisor assumes that you would know, but you don't know because it's the first time you're doing it. But also, different supervisors have different ways of working. And how do you know that? Even if you talk to your friends and say, well, I don't know, am I meant to do this? Am I meant to do that? Well, your friend's supervisor might have a different expectation. So you need to discuss these things with the supervisor. And what we offer is just a series of questions. We're not saying what the answers are, although we're very happy in this workshop to discuss some of these questions. Pop in the chat if you have any questions about the questions. But we offer you a series of questions that we say all supervisors and students should have had a conversation around these questions and come to some kind of answer between them. There's not necessarily a right or wrong, but there is a need for all of you to know what the expectations are. So we start off with a section on meetings. You're going to meet with your supervisor, but how often will you meet? It says team here because I took this one from a team, I think, a team supervision group, but it might just be you and your supervisor. It might be you and 2 or 3 supervisors and 5 or 6 other people in the project team. How often do you get to meet? Do you just meet randomly in the laboratory because you're in the laboratory most days? Or do you actually set up appointments to meet? Do you meet in your supervisor's office? Who sets up the meeting? And for me, in the way I supervise, it's definitely my students who set up the meeting. It's your project. You must set up the meetings. You must remind me of the meeting. But your supervisor might have a different view. But I certainly like my students to take responsibility and to set up the meeting. What is the longest between meetings? Well, a lot of this depends on, are you full-time on campus? Are you working together in the laboratory or are you off campus? I say to my students who are doing it part-time, they're doing PhDs part-time and they are off campus, that the absolutely longest they should ever go without a conversation with me is 6 weeks. We meet preferably much more often. I have some students I meet every week, some students I meet once a month. But if you go more than 6 weeks, in my view, it soon becomes easy to kind of not be doing the PhD anymore, the master's anymore, and just be feeling horrible about yourself because you should be doing it. Whereas regular meetings will keep you on track. So for me, when I don't hear from students for a long time, it usually means that things are not going well with their studies. And I urge them, when things are not going well, that's when you need to see a supervisor. When things are going well, you want to see your supervisor, that's fine, go ahead and do so. But it's when things are going badly, when you've hit a brick wall, when you're not making progress, when you feel embarrassed to see your supervisor, that is when you most need to see your supervisors. Do you just make an appointment or to discuss a concern, or do you submit work first? Do you keep a record of such meetings? How do you know how often you've met or what have you? Who does that? These are all things you might want to discuss. What are your expectations? What are the supervisor's expectations around what do you have to attend? Are there doc weeks? Are there seminars? Is there a research design course? Are there CPGS workshops and short courses that your supervisor especially wants you to attend? Submission of written work. Do you just submit some bullets, some rough ideas and discuss those, or are you expected to give nice polished drafts? Different supervisors have got different rules. For me, sometimes I'll have students who'll say, I'm playing with this idea, what do you think of this? And I don't do detailed feedback. It's often even in the body of the email, and then I can reply very quickly because it's clear from their email that this is just a quick question around their thinking. Whereas if it's got an attachment of a chapter, I'll often have to wait a week or 2 to get to it because I've got other students ahead of them. And then if it's an attachment, I expect it to be a more polished piece that they want more detailed feedback on. Do students submit small sections or whole chapters? You need to know this. For me, I always prefer small sections because I don't want my scholars to be working for a month or 2 in the wrong direction. I'd rather keep in touch as they go, but different supervisors have different ideas. How frequently is written work submitted? Of course, this will change over the course of your studies, but how frequently? You know, are you submitting a chapter a month? Are you submitting a chapter every 2 months? Are you submitting, how often are you submitting work? How long, and this is the key one that many of you already raised, how long do you wait for feedback? You should know this, you should discuss it with your supervisor, and it should be clear that you both know that you have to wait 2 weeks for feedback or 3 weeks for feedback, whatever it is. And what do you do if the time's gone past? I always say to my students, I aim for 2 weeks, I often only make 3 weeks, and you must remind me. I do have a system whenever work comes in of making it putting it in my diary, but sometimes things fall through the cracks and you could be desperately waiting because it's month 2, month 3, and you haven't got feedback, and your supervisor is completely oblivious because they've forgotten about it. So do remind your supervisor that they have that you're waiting for feedback. What form will the feedback take? This is also worth discussing. Are you expecting your supervisor to give you line by line feedback? Because they probably won't. You know, how might that work? Will they give you written feedback? Will they meet with you and just discuss your work? And to what extent will the supervisor do the kind of surface error correction, spelling, grammar, and so on? Personally, I always say I won't do it, but because I was an English teacher back in the day, I found myself doing a little bit of it. I am of the view, and we'll talk about this later in the year in future workshops, that your first drafts often have lots of spelling and grammar errors because you're still trying to get the thinking straight. You're trying to get the logic straight. You're trying to build a clear argument and use good literature. So inevitably, it's going to have language errors. I'm not too fussed about those. In my view, in this day and age, a computer can fix that for you at the end, or a proofreader can, but not all supervisors will have that view. So it's worth discussing this with them. Thanks, Asiphe. Co-supervision, is there going to be more than one supervisor? What's the role of each? How do they work together? Because sometimes this supervisor looks at the methodology, that supervisor looks at the literature. Sometimes you have to submit it to both at the same time. Different groups work in different ways. How are you going to make sure that everyone's informed of the discussion? And what will you do when they tell you the exact opposite thing, which will happen because knowledge is contested. No piece of knowledge is simple, formulaic, everyone agrees on it. Any two authors writing about the same piece of research will do it in different ways. So your supervisors are going to give you different feedback. And you need to be able to think about how you'll negotiate that. Sometimes if that's directly oppositional, you can say, hey, listen, you saying I need a sample of 10, you saying I need a sample of 20, which is it? Other times the conflict might be more vague. I think you need to put in more theory here. I think you've got too much theory here. How are you going to moderate that? Don't panic if your supervisors are telling you opposite things or different things. This doesn't mean that one of them's an idiot or that there's a big problem with your study. It's indicative of how knowledge is actually contested, and you end up with a piece of knowledge which is as strong as possible can be in the field. But even that, a future person can read and critique. That is the nature of knowledge. So having contradictory input is inevitable. And indeed, when your theses get examined, you'll get contradictory responses, no doubt, from your different examiners. Progress. What is the planned progress of the study? How long are you going to spend doing what? Have you got modules first before you do the thesis? Should you be working on the thesis while you're doing the modules, or at least the proposal? When you are now working on the thesis, what are the deadlines for different chapters? I think it's well worth setting out a set of deadlines, milestones, celebrate each and every milestone. Like when you submit a chapter to your supervisor, celebrate that in whatever way you like, whether that's having a beer or doing a dance, whatever works for you, celebrate every milestone. Even when that chapter comes back to you 2 weeks later and you've got to redo it, the fact is that you did it and you submitted it. So celebrate those milestones. Have your milestones very clearly written up, discuss them with your supervisor, paste them up on your mirror. It won't stay like that. Things move around. You thought you'd be working on your literature review in this month, but instead you're still working on an experiment. So your plan is going to be constantly scratched out and rewritten, but I think it's useful. And it's useful to try and commit to your deadlines. And so those deadlines should include submission deadlines to your supervisor. those students that are in the room that are in the natural sciences, it's not uncommon for people in the natural sciences to put out their plan of all the different steps they're going to take in their process. And then right at the end, the last 3 months or 6 months, they have something called writing up, when suddenly all the writing's going to happen. I urge you to understand that you're reading in a field to make a contribution at the frontiers of the field. You can't read all the literature in the field, all the current debates, current experiments in your area in just those last 3 to 6 months. So even if your first year or 2 years or whatever is mainly practical work, it needs all the way through to be accompanied by some reading and some writing, even if at that stage most of the writing is scribbled nonsense for yourself, where you work out what you think. You have to fill in the progress report every January to be allowed to re-register. And increasingly, the concerns are being raised if students don't, for example, get their proposal through in the first year of registration. You won't automatically get a second year of registration. You'll need to be able to explain why you didn't manage to do that. And increasingly, I think there is a clearer understanding that people need milestones. We need to know for ourselves, supervisors and students, what's expected when. It's no good saying, good, your proposal's approved. Go off and do a PhD and I'll see you in a couple of years. We need to know along the way, what are the deadlines along the way? And how often will you review it and so on? Okay, and how project management be undertaken? Who's responsible for making sure that the data is collected in time? You've got your ethical clearance, whatever chemicals you need are in time, all the different little steps, a lot of them behind the scenes. Think through what they might entail and think through which is your responsibility and which will happen because your supervisor will do it. Thanks, Asiphe. Right, knowledge dissemination. And I want you to note that it's called knowledge dissemination and not just publishing. It's my personal view that we focus on the idea of publishing as if that is a point in itself. But actually, the whole point of publishing is to disseminate your knowledge. If you are not committed to knowledge dissemination, you're going to find it especially difficult to get a publication because you are under the misapprehension that getting a publication is the goal. But getting a publication is simply the means of getting your important knowledge out there and read and heard and learnt about by others in the field. So keep that in mind, and that's something we'll talk about a few times during the year. How will you disseminate your knowledge? So these are conversations that's worth having a discussion with your supervisor. What are good conferences to attend? Are there specific aspects of your study that you might present at a conference? It's really useful to go to conferences and try things out because you get immediate feedback from people and you get the confidence when you have to explain some of your work to others. You build confidence in your own understanding of that. Also, don't forget that every year the Centre for Postgraduate Studies has a postgraduate conference, which is a really good opportunity to share your work. And I would absolutely urge every single one of you to present at that. This is what I'm talking about when I say that a postgraduate study is about developing yourself. It's developing your confidence to talk about your work. And by the way, you get, when you apply, any of you apply for NRF funding and various other funders, they'll often ask you to specify what, whether you have presented your work at conferences. And the Centre for Postgraduate Studies internal conference definitely counts as a legitimate conference because we have a book of abstracts and so on. So it adds to your ability to show funders that your CV demonstrates that you don't only do the written work, the thinking work, the intellectual work, you also share it in various platforms. Is there any funding available for conference attendance? There is very limited funding available via Rhodes, the TNS application. In order to apply for that funding, you need to be a registered student and you need to show that you have already submitted your abstract. So you have to attach your abstract and you have to attach an email or a letter from the conference organizers to say that your abstract has been accepted for presentation. You can't apply unless you've got that. A master's student can get funding, partial funding, for a national conference. So a master's student can go and present at any national conference, and a PhD student can present at a national or a international conference. The funding, I think, is fairly limited, so you'd have to definitely do it on a shoestring, or you might be able to find other funding from your supervisor or elsewhere, or the dean's discretionary allowance to top that up. But that might be, you've got to be presenting at the conference, but that might be worth considering. Discuss it with your supervisor. Simple little things on a conference program. Do you submit the abstract in your name, or does it also include your supervisors? That varies by supervisor and by field. Do your supervisors help you to craft the abstract, or are you on your own with that? Are there any publications that might emerge? And at what stage should you be thinking about publications? Should you be writing them during your studies or after you've graduated? That, again, different supervisors have got different views on that. And what is the role of the supervisor? Will they help you to craft a publication and to write it and to submit it, or are you on your own in that? Whose names go on the publication as authors? That also varies very, very differently by different disciplines and by different supervisors. But it's important to know that up front, which names are going to go onto the publication, and how is that? What order is that going to go in? Have that conversation up front before it's done. And then if you're an academic, and many of our PhD students in particular are also academics at other universities. Now, the kind of rule of DHET is that you publish under the institution in which the study was done. So if you registered as a PhD student at Rhodes, your publication should be in the name of Rhodes, not in the name of whatever university you work at. But we generally do a kind of compromise there, where if your supervisor is a co-author, they'll be at Rhodes, so that's okay. Or you have both. You can have more than one affiliation on your name in a publication. So I could be Sioux, McKenna, Rhodes University and Walter Sisulu University. But these are the specific things that you might want to discuss with your supervisor. And then last slide, I think, please, Alwetu. I think it's Alwetu now in charge of slides. Thank you. And then just the last few things of, do you understand the Ross reporting every year? You have to do that before you can register. What happens if you've got unacceptably slow progress? Now, of course, this will depend, defining this will depend on whether you've actually set up a kind of list of milestones. But what will happen? Because sometimes things do go slower than you would like. How should this be handled? I would like to suggest to you all that when things are going badly, tell your supervisor. Whether you've hit a block or a brick wall, or something's happened in your personal life, things happen. You find out you're pregnant, you're getting divorced, you have a car accident. Things happen, good and bad, that can make it a challenge to continue with your studies. Keep your supervisor informed. Your supervisor is much more likely to be able to speak on your behalf, to be able to extend your studies, if you have kept them informed. Students that have simply gone missing for a year and then come back and say, oh no, I need another year of registration, are probably going to get a less sympathetic hearing. What are you going to do if there's a conflict? I hope that there isn't a conflict, and I hope that an open conversation around these questions will make conflict less likely, because you both know what's to be expected. But what do you do if there's a conflict? To a large extent, it's up to you. You do have a lot of agency as postgraduate students to choose how to manage it, but you'll see that the Higher Degrees Guide and the supervision policy also does speak to this. If you are unable to resolve it directly with your supervisor, and I hope that you would be able to, but if you can't, you can go to the HOD, you can go to the dean, you could come to me as Director of Postgraduate Studies, and you can go to the DVC of Research. So it would usually be in that order, but if for any reason you feel that you couldn't speak to the HOD, maybe they are your supervisor, or for whatever reason, you don't have to follow that, that order of things. But basically the order is speak to your supervisor. If that doesn't work, speak to the HOD. If that doesn't work, the dean. If that doesn't work, me. If that doesn't work, the DVC. But really what we want to know is that you will find a space to speak about your conflict. Don't sit on it, tearful or boiling with anger. Find a person within the institution who will listen to you in a calm way and help you to resolve the issue. we genuinely want all conflicts to be resolved, it is very much in our interests, and hopefully all supervisors understand that it's in their interests, that you have a really enjoyable, yes, intellectually challenging, but enjoyable postgraduate time journey, with challenges along the way, but that you can genuinely look at it and say, hey, I'm proud of myself, I've done well. And we like to provide the kind of environment that would allow you to do that. Suspension of studies. Suspension of studies is when things have really gone wrong for you, usually personally. Often it'll be around a health issue, might be that as you're pregnant, you're having a baby, but for one reason or another, you cannot continue with your studies, but you are not willing to stop your studies and start again from scratch. You believe that you just need a break. In order to get a suspension of studies, you've got to complete a form which has to have your motivation, and it has to be signed by your supervisor. So that's a suspension of studies form. You can only suspend your studies for 1 year, and you can't suspend your studies during year 1. So if things go badly wrong for you in year 1, something horrible happens in your life or something wonderful, perhaps you want to take the whole of the second year, you want to just stop the clock ticking. You can suspend your years for the second, can suspend for second year. It's not great to suspend your studies. It does stop the clock ticking, so that if you're going to take an extra year, that suspended year won't count in terms of the maximum number of years you can be registered for. But it definitely stops the momentum. So my view is, as long as you keep visiting your master's or PhD every day, even if you're only able to visit it for a short time, when I say visit it, I mean do a reading, write a thought for yourself, do a little bit of journaling, go into the laboratory, attend a seminar, just keep visiting that study. Will keep it, it'll keep it going. Momentum is everything. And then, of course, there may be other issues. So that last point just simply says, any other issues? And so perhaps before you have the meeting with your supervisor, think through it. Is there anything else you'd like to speak to your supervisor about? Before I open for question, and I really do want to open for any, if there are any questions, I just want to remind you of two things. Asiphe said at the beginning that this workshop is part of a broader orientation course, and you can see that Olwetu has put the self-enrollment link on Are You Connected? On that site is a wealth of little videos, and it might seem kind of tedious to sit and watch these videos on your own now, but I'm telling you, as someone who's researched postgraduate education, that watching those videos and trying to embody them in your practice will make a huge difference. So if you can set yourself a goal during this month of postgraduate orientation to perhaps watch 2 or 3 of the videos a week, they're very short, and make some notes for yourself in a little research journal. What did you learn from that video? What are you going to try and do? I think that setting up these practices, it's a little bit like running and building up the muscle to be able to run without being completely out of breath and being able to run further. It's a bit like that. So those videos will just help you to give you some ideas of the kinds of good practices that really proficient postgraduate students enact. So give it a go. You'll also see that Olwetu has posted, that was the second thing I want to say, has posted the little evaluation link. And that's also useful for us, just to let us know of what it is that we should be doing in the Postgraduate Studies Centre, what topics are there. We already have a whole lot, but we are always open to adding more. And that is where I am going to stop, but where I'd like to ask all of you, if there are any questions or comments, feel free to either put up your hand or unmute yourself or put it in the chat bar. How are you going to manage your relationship with your supervisor, your expectations of your supervisor, their expectations of you? Any questions about anything we've spoken about today?
Hi, Sue. Thank you very much. There's one question that came up on the chat asking, do supervisors also have their own supervisors? So if maybe you can touch on that.
Yeah, that's a nice question. So it's quite interesting, you know, because professional psychologists, therapists, are expected to have a certain number of hours of supervision every year, which is basically where they see a therapist and discuss cases. And I think that's a really good idea. So some supervisors have got supervisors because they're busy with their own PhD studies, but for the rest of us, no, we don't. But where we hope to get support is either by supervising in groups and teams and programs where we talking to each other about our supervision, or through various supervision courses. So Rhodes University, for example, offers a course for supervisors every year. It's a voluntary course. It is an accredited course. We offer this course every year for people who are already supervisors or want to become supervisors, to get them to think through what kind of supervisor they want to be and how they should work with their students. But I think most of us have mentors of one kind or another. And certainly for myself, when I hit a tough period in my supervision, I'm not sure what advice to give a student or something like that, then I would go to my mentor and get advice from them.
Thank you very much, Sue. We have a question and a comment from Uzanele saying she finds that unacceptable, the fact that she has to remind her supervisor at least 3 times about work that she would have sent them in her master's. And she's asking, because you had mentioned that academics are also busy, are you saying it is acceptable? And then Duduzile is saying, is my supervisor for all my modules or for specific modules? I think Duduzile, particularly in honors, you usually have modules that you are writing examinations for, but there's also a research project in which your supervisor becomes your supervisor in that research project. And I think for some masters, so for some masters in different disciplines, they usually have coursework where it is modules for examinations, but there's that research project that the supervisor is guiding you through in order to submit at the end of the year. So if you'd like to respond.
Yes, sure. Let me just first say that Dudu has said that she is doing an MBA. So I suspect, as far as I recall, you will have different supervisors for different assignments, but then you'll have one for your bigger assignment who's probably taught you on one of those modules. But that is something that you can certainly ask the department already. You know, who is it that you'll be working with as your supervisor for your bigger research paper? Because it's a good idea, those of you doing coursework masters, to already be thinking about that research paper or half thesis, depending on your program, so that you can already start to be doing readings in that direction. Maybe some of your assignments and the modules can be directed towards your thesis in a way that you kind of building towards that. That's a very useful thing to do. Right, so let me go back to Zanele's tough question. No, I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think you should have to remind 3 times. I don't think you should have to wait for months. Where these things happen, I do think that it's worth following up with the HOD or the dean. So I'm giving you kind of 2 messages. On the one hand, I want to say supervisors are human, we make mistakes. So you've got to kind of, I think, judge it. If you've got a supervisor who goes like, oh my word, I can't believe you waited so long for this feedback. You know, first I had that happen and then this happened and then I completely forgot and I promised you, you know, I'm going to do it this weekend. I mean, I would hope that that kind of conversation leads to you going, not a problem, thank you. But where it's kind of more the supervisor's absent, they're making excuses, they're never available, then they don't reply to your reminders, then I would suggest that there's starting to be some indication of a problem. And just like you would complain if a lecturer didn't pitch up at your undergraduate class 2 or 3 times, or 3 or 4 times, at some point the class is going to say, what the hell is happening? The lecturer's not there. Think of it as in the same way, you know. So I would always say your first port of call is to discuss it with the supervisor. Find out from the supervisor who, you know, what's happening. Ask them. Be open to having a good relationship with them. And so having just a collegial conversation saying, I'm a bit unhappy because I haven't had that feedback yet. what's happening. But if that doesn't work out, then you possibly do need to take further action. You've only got a short time to get this done, and you want it to be done in a really good quality. So you don't want to be spending half that time chasing after someone. Asiphe, I can see a couple more questions. So I can see Anela has asked, is it possible to do a master's by thesis in 1 year? Yes, it is possible, but it is highly unlikely. So there's nothing stopping you from going for it. It has been done. A master's, you may, according to the legislation, you only have to be registered for 1 year. A PhD, you have to be registered for 2 years. So believe it or not, it's possible to do a PhD in 2 years. It's possible to do a master's in 1 year, but it's unlikely. So set up those goals, those milestones for yourself, if you like, to finish in 1 year. But also, I think, be kind to yourself if you don't make those dates. Be careful of setting up unrealistic targets and then really sort of getting into a whole self-blame thing when you don't meet them. Set up those unrealistic targets, work hard for them, and hey, you might be in the minority who does manage to do it. But if you aren't, don't beat yourself up over it. Just plan the next few steps.
I think we have one, Sue, that's asking about the role of cultural diversity in managing the supervision process.
Hello, Yolo. Yeah, look, I think we live in such a culturally diverse environment that it's very true that almost all of our interactions with people are going to be culturally diverse. The extent to which a supervisor is aware of their own cultural biases and blind spots may vary. I think there are some supervisors who are very, they're expert in their field, and so they're going to be brilliant supervisors who are really going to help you become excellent at producing knowledge in the field, but maybe aren't the most people persons and maybe aren't that aware of how what they think is just the way everyone is actually just their culture. And it's so I think that there may be some blind spots, but certainly it's something we engage with supervisors in the supervision development course, but not all supervisors choose to come to that course. If you've got a good relationship with your supervisor, maybe you can raise these issues. Depends on the relationship. I quite like the fact that I have a number of students. Asiphe is actually one of my PhD students, but I have a number of students like Asiphe who will call me out on things where I'm certainly not intentionally being rude or dismissive, but my cultural blind spots, we all have them. Every single person in the Zoom call has cultural blind spots. We are raised to assume that our ways of doing things are, I can put it in inverted commas, normal, the main way, the mainstream way. And the more you experience life with curiosity and open eyes and open arms, the more you see, hey, there's many ways of being in this world. So I'm very lucky that I do have PhD students who will call me out sometimes and say, hey, Sue, you know, when you said this, it felt like you were saying that or whatever. So it might be that you can actually help your supervisor by making them aware of cultural diversity issues, if you've got that kind of relationship. Asiphe has asked, I'm new at Rhodes University, know about bursaries and funding. Postgraduate funding is run by the Postgraduate Funding Centre, which is in the main clock tower building. It's near the research office. They are just applying. I've just seen the advert for a new staff member, so I know that the post, I think, is empty at the moment, but Jane Roberts, who's the Director of Research, is overseeing postgraduate funding at the moment. So you would have to go, but you could also just walk along the corridor to Postgraduate Funding Office and see if you can chat to whoever's there or make an appointment with them there.
I see there's a question by Usimpiwe asking if it is a good or a bad situation to have a postdoctoral supervisor, as they are finding it interesting, although a bit tricky at times.
Yeah, so postdocs do generally have a supervisor, sometimes called an advisor. And I've had a few postdocs. It's a slightly different relationship because I think that typically at postdoc level, the person's kind of running their own project. But you are just out of a doctorate. You probably want to have a sounding board. I think it varies. I think there's much less literature and much less experience of what that relationship should look like. And I think it looks very different in different fields. I would suggest that you do need a supervisor, but hopefully someone you can bounce ideas off. If the current supervisor is not fitting the bill entirely, you can always ask if someone else can also come in as a co-supervisor. You can have more than one supervisor. Is it possible to do a master in mathematics in 1 year, says Tembeletu. I'm loving the optimism of everyone in this group. Again, it's possible, but unlikely. But anything that's possible, someone does it. So, hey, you might be the one. But just accept that it's unlikely. So it's something to aspire for, but not something to beat yourself up over if you don't make it. Oh, and Dudu asked a follow-up question. It's not clear when to contact the supervisor. I've got the contact details. Okay, so as far as I can understand, Duduzile is busy doing modules, but has the name of supervisor. I would suggest you email the supervisor and just say, hello, I'm so-and-so. I'm busy doing this course. I'm told that you will be my supervisor, and I'd just really like to make contact. I think a bit of forward-thinking enthusiasm sets the ground for a really good study and shows the supervisor that you are interested and keen. Another little hint is when you are, and this might be true for you, Duduzile, but it's probably true for anyone who's thinking about doing, maybe in a master's, you're thinking about doing a PhD in the future, or you're in a PhD, you're thinking about doing a postdoc, is when you're looking for a supervisor, do some reading about them. If possible, speak to some other people who've been supervised by them, because if they say, oh, no, don't, it's terrible. If they say, hey, do, that's really good. But even if it's someone on the other side of the world, you can't possibly speak to their students, you can, look on the internet, read up about them, read some of their articles. Are they researching in something that's interesting to you? And when you connect with them, say, I've read your article on such and such, and I found this really interesting. Now, in a way, that might just sound like I'm playing a game. You give a potential supervisor, a compliment about their work, and they're more likely to take you on. Of course, there's some truth in that. But I think it also just shows that you're not just someone who wants to get a master's or get a PhD. You're someone who's willing to do the work. You're not asking to just be handed it. You're doing the work, you're interested, you do reading, you look around. And so I must say, I think that it's worth, look up your supervisor, read some of their stuff. That's an important way of connecting with them, because as academics, our research is our passion. So our publications will often speak to who we are, perhaps in a way that's not that evident when you're sitting in our office with us. Tembeletu is asking about recordings from workshops. I'll leave that one to you, Asiphe.
Thank you very much, Sue. All the workshops are usually posted on our YouTube page. So every week, for the people who have enrolled into the orientation program, will receive the recordings of that week's workshops, which is 2 workshops a week. So you will receive it in the ARIO Connect page. So when you go to the ARIO Connect page, you will see there's gonna be a link for the workshop. For example, workshop 1, there's gonna be a link to the recording. However, the other thing that we're gonna be doing is that everyone who has registered to attend this Zoom workshop will receive the recording as well separately, including the YouTube recording, where we usually archive our workshops. And I always encourage postgrad scholars as well as academics to actually visit our YouTube page, which has videos from previous years in engaging in different workshops, some that we are going to be having, but others we are not going to be having this year. So it's very important to stay in touch, not only on our CPGS mailing list, but also on our social media platforms. We are on Twitter, we are on Facebook, we are on YouTube, and as well as Instagram. So that is where we do engagements the most. But I think from the discussions today, I really would like us to always remember that as a person that is doing this research, the vehicle is driven by you. It is the same as you are waiting for feedback, or as you are waiting for your supervisor to contact you based on the agreement in the department on when the supervision needs to start. Keep on driving the car, reading on how to do a master's thesis, or the things that you need to expect in your field, how to actually write, what is a research question, what is a theory, what is a methodology. That will assist you to actually do this master's in a year, because by the time you meet your supervisor, you have already researched and crafted the idea of your topic, and they then come in as a passenger to drive with you in this idea of the research that you wanted to pursue. Just before moving to the closing, we have our final task, which is task 8, looking at the plan of action. Remember, we did the characteristics and then we gave ourselves some scores. Now we also learned about the questions that you may actually or may not ask your supervisor based on how you would like to build that supervision relationship. And also very important to note that 2 years, 3 years, a year is quite a very long time to not have a good communication and a good relationship with your supervisor. So this task, we want you to think about what you are going to do better to manage your supervisor moving forward. Now that you know all this information in terms of the characteristics of a good supervisor, the characteristics of a good PhD scholar, what do you plan to do next to better manage your supervisor and yourself as well as your research, the plan of action moving forward? So as you are thinking about
I think we lost Asiphe then. If I'm correct, if everyone else can hear me and also has the silence from Asiphe, then
Hi, Sioux.
Oh, there.
Did it cut me off or?
Yeah, it cut you off, but it's okay. We can hear you now.
Okay, so as I was saying, the task that we are doing is what the people that are here, the postgraduate scholars, then to do better in order to ensure that we drive their research as well as they manage their supervisors.
And this is a reminder to all of you that I think hopefully supervisors know that you are all balancing very full lives. Some of you are lucky enough to be full-time scholars and be on campus. That brings its own challenges though. But many of you are studying part-time. You all have family responsibilities and work responsibilities. Many of you are doing part-time work or full-time work. It's important to note to give yourself a break and understand, you know what, I'm juggling a lot. But giving yourself a break in terms of that is not the same thing as giving yourself a free ride. You need to, at the beginning of the year, think, where am I going to make the space for my studies? How am I going to craft my life? What can I give up to make space for my studies? You can't give up friends and family. You can't give up sleep. But maybe you cut back on some of your socialization. Maybe you give up Netflix, those of you like me who can happily watch episode after episode after episode. Think about your lives and think about what will I be able to do to set in place the time and the discipline to do this while acknowledging that I have all these other responsibilities to carry. Thank you so much for your time. Please follow the link for the evaluation. Please follow the link to look through the materials on the orientation course online. And I think that is it. Keep well, everyone. Chat soon. Bye.